Chapter 18, which is rather full of princesses. The child's screams rose. There was no doubt about the direction. As Sophie and Abdullah ran that way, along a pillared cloister, Sophie panted,
"It's not Morgan. It's an older child."
Abdullah thought she was right. He could hear words in the screams, although he could not pick out what they were. And surely Morgan, even howling his loudest, did not possess big enough lungs to make this kind of noise. After getting almost too loud to bear, the screams became grating sobs. Those sank to a steady, nagging, and just as that sound became truly intolerable, the child raised his or her voice into hysterical screams again. Sophie and Abdullah followed the noise to the end of the cloister and out into a huge cloudy hall. There they stopped prudently behind a pillar, and Sophie said,
"Our main room. They must have blown it up like a balloon."
It was a very big hall. The screaming child was in the middle of it. She was about 4 years old, with fair curls and wearing a white nightdress. Her face was red, her mouth was a black square, and she was alternately throwing herself down on the green porphyry floor and standing up in order to throw herself down again. If ever there was a child in a temper, it was this one. The echoes in the huge hall yelled with it.
"It's Princess Valeria,"
Sophie murmured to Abdullah.
"I thought it might be."
Hovering over the howling princess was the huge dark shape of Hasruel. Another djinn, much smaller and paler, was dodging about behind him.
"Do something!"
This small djinn shouted. Only the fact that he had a voice like silver trumpets made him audible.
"She's driving me insane!"
Hasruel bent his great visage down to Valeria's screaming face. "Little princess," he boomingly cooed, "stop crying. You will not be hurt." Princess Valeria's answer was first to stand up and scream in Hasruel's face, then to throw herself flat on the floor and roll and kick there. She vociferated.
"I want home! I want my dad! I want my nurse! I want my Uncle Justin!"
"Little princess," Hasruel cooed desperately.
"Don't just coo at her!"
trumpeted the other djinn, who was clearly Dalzell.
"Work some magic! Sweet dreams! A spell of silence! 1,000 teddies! A ton of toffee! Anything!"
Hasruel turned around on his brother. His spread wings fanned agitated gales, which flapped Valeria's hair and fluttered her nightdress. Sophie and Abdullah had to cling to the pillar, or the force of the wind would have blown them backward. But it made no difference to Princess Valeria's tantrum. If anything, she screamed harder. "I have tried all that, brother of mine," Hasruel boomed. Princess Valeria was now producing steady yells of,
"Mother! Mother! They're being horrid to me!"
Hasruel had to raise his voice to a perfect thunder. "Don't you know," he thundered, "that there is almost no magic that will stop a child in this kind of temper?" Dalzell clapped his pale hands across his ears, pointed ears with a look of fungus to them.
"Well, I can't stand it!"
he shrilled.
"Put her to sleep for 100 years!"
Hasruel nodded. He turned back to Princess Valeria as she screamed and thrashed upon the floor and spread his huge hand above her.
"Oh dear,"
said Sophie to Abdullah.
"Do something!"
Since Abdullah had no idea what to do, and since he privately felt that anything that stopped this horrible noise was a good idea, he did nothing but edge uncertainly away from the pillar. And fortunately, before Hasruel's magic had any noticeable effect on Princess Valeria, a crowd of other people arrived. A loud, rather rasping voice cut through the din.
What is all this noise about?
Both the djinns started backward. The new arrivals were all female, and they all looked extremely displeased. But when you had said that, you seemed to have said the only two things they had in common. They stood in a row, 30 or so of them, glaring accusingly at the two djinns, and they were tall, short, stout, skinny, young and old, and of every color the human race produces. Abdullah's eyes scudded along the row in amazement. These must be the kidnapped princesses. That was the third thing they had in common. They ranged from a tiny, frail yellow princess nearest to him to an elderly, bent princess in the mid-distance, and they were wearing every possible kind of clothing, from a ball dress to tweeds. The one who called out was a sturdily built, middle-sized princess standing slightly in front of the rest. She was wearing riding clothes. Her face, besides being tanned and a little lined from outdoor activity, was downright and sensible. She looked at the two djinns with utter contempt.
Of all the ridiculous things,
she said.
Two great, powerful creatures like you, and you can't even stop a child crying.
And she stepped up to Valeria and gave her a sharp slap on her thrashing behind.
Shut up!
It worked. Valeria had never been slapped in her life before. She rolled over and sat up as if she had been shot. She stared at the downright princess out of astonished, swollen eyes.
You hit me. And I shall hit you again if you ask for it,
said the downright princess.
I shall scream,
said Valeria. Her mouth went square again. She drew a deep breath.
No, you won't,
said the downright princess. She picked Valeria up and bundled her briskly into the arms of the two princesses behind her. They and several more closed around Valeria in a huddle, making soothing noises. From the midst of the huddle, Valeria began screaming again, but in a way that was not quite convinced. The downright princess put her hands on her hips and turned contemptuously to the djinns.
See,
she said,
all you need is a bit of firmness and some kindness, but neither of you can be expected to understand that.
Dalzell stepped toward her. Now that he was not so anguished, Abdullah saw with surprise that Dalzell was beautiful. Apart from his fungoid ears and taloned feet, he could have been a tall, angelic man. Golden curls grew on his head, and his wings, though small and stunted-looking, were golden too. His very red mouth spread into a sweet smile. Altogether, he had an unearthly beauty that matched the strange cloud kingdom where he lived.
Pray, take the child away,
he said,
and comfort her, O Princess Beatrice, most excellent of my wives.
Downright Princess Beatrice was gesturing to the other princesses to take Valeria away anyway, but she turned back sharply at this.
I've told you this, lad,
she said,
that none of us is any wife of yours. You can call us that until you're blue in the face, but it won't make the slightest difference. We are not your wives, and we never will be.
Exactly, said most of the other princesses in a firm but ragged chorus. All of them, except for one, turned and swept away, taking the sobbing Princess Valeria with them. Sophie's face was lit with a delighted smile. She whispered,
It looks as if the princesses are holding their own.
Abdullah could not attend to her. The remaining princess was Flower in the Night. She was, as always, twice as beautiful as he remembered her, looking very sweet and grave, with her great dark eyes fixed seriously on Dalzell. She bowed politely. Abdullah's senses sang at the sight of her. The cloudy pillars around him seemed to sway in and out of existence. His heart pounded for joy. She was safe. She was here. She was speaking to Dalzell.
"Forgive me, great Djinn, if I remain to ask you a question,"
she said, and her voice, even more than Abdullah remembered it, was melodious and merry as a cool fountain. To Abdullah's outrage, Dalzell reacted with what seemed to be horror. "Oh, not you again," he trumpeted, at which Hasrael, standing like a dark column in the background, folded his arms and grinned maliciously.
"Yes, it is I, stern stealer of the daughters of sultans,"
Flower in the Night said with her head bowed politely.
"I am here merely to ask what thing it was which started the child crying."
"How should I know?" Dalzell demanded. "You're always asking me questions I can't answer. Why are you asking this one?"
"Because,"
Flower in the Night answered,
"O robber of the offspring of rulers, the easiest way to calm the child is to deal with the cause of her temper. This I know from my own childhood, for I was much given to tantrums myself."
"Surely not," Abdullah thought. "She is lying for a purpose. No nature as sweet as hers could ever have screamed for anything." Yet, as he was outraged to see, Dalzell had no difficulty believing this. "I'll bet you were," Dalzell said.
"So what was the cause, bereaver of the brave?"
Flower in the Night persisted.
"Was it that she wishes to be back in her own palace, or to have her own particular doll? Or was she simply frightened by your face, or—"
"I'm not sending her back if that's what you're aiming for," Dalzell interrupted. "She's one of my wives now."
"Then I adjure you to find out what set her off screaming, raptor of the righteous,"
Flower in the Night said politely.
"For without that knowledge, even 30 princesses may not silence her."
Indeed, Princess Valeria's voice was rising again in the distance. As she spoke.
"I speak from experience,"
Flower in the Night observed.
"I once screamed night and day for a whole week until my voice was gone, because I had grown out of my favorite shoes."
Abdullah could see Flower in the Night was telling the exact truth. He tried to believe it, but try as he might, he just could not imagine his lovely Flower in the Night lying on the floor, kicking and screaming. Dalzell again had no difficulty at all. He shuddered and turned angrily to Hasruel.
"Think, can't you? You brought her in. You must have noticed what set her off."
Hasruel's great brown visage crumpled helplessly.
"Brother mine, I brought her in through the kitchen, for she was silent and white with fear, and I thought maybe a sweetmeat would make her happy. But she threw the sweetmeats at the cook's dog and remained silent. Her cries only began, as you know, after I placed her among the other princesses, and her screams only when you had her brought."
Flower in the Night raised a finger.
"Ah!"
she said. Both djinns turned to her.
"I have it,"
she said.
"It must be the cook's dog. It is often an animal with children. She is used to being given all she wants, and she wants the dog. Instruct your cook, king of kidnappers, to bring his animal to our quarters, and the noise will cease. This I promise you."
"Very well," said Dalzell. "Do it!" He trumpeted at Hasruel. Flower in the Night bowed.
"I thank you,"
she said, and turned and walked gracefully away. Sophie shook Abdullah's arm.
"Let's follow her."
Abdullah did not move or reply. He stared after Flower in the Night, hardly able to believe he was really seeing her, and equally unable to believe that Dalzell did not fall at her feet and adore her. He had to admit that this was a relief, but all the same.
"She's yours, is she?"
Sophie said after one look at his face. Abdullah nodded raptly.
Then you've got good taste, said Sophie. Now come on before they notice us.
They edged behind the pillars in the direction Flower in the Night had gone, keeping a wary eye on the huge hall as they went. In the far distance, Dalzell was moodily settling into an enormous throne at the top of a flight of steps. When Hasriel returned from wherever the kitchens were, Dalzell motioned him to kneel by the throne. Neither looked their way. Sophie and Abdullah tiptoed to an archway where a curtain was still swaying after Flower in the Night had lifted it to go through. They pushed the curtain aside and followed. There was a large, well-lit room beyond, confusingly full of princesses. From somewhere in the midst of them, Princess Valeria sobbed,
I want to go home. Now! Hush, dear. You shall soon,
someone answered. Princess Beatrice's voice said,
You cried beautifully, Valeria. We're all proud of you. But do stop crying now. There's a good girl. Can't,
sobbed Valeria.
I'm in the habit.
Sophie was staring around the room in growing outrage.
This is our broom cupboard,
she said.
Really?
Abdullah could not attend to her because Flower in the Night was quite near, softly calling.
Beatrice.
Princess Beatrice heard and plunged out of the crowd.
Don't tell me, she said. You did it. Good. Those djinns don't know what hits them when you get after them, Flower. Then things are coming along beautifully if that man agrees.
At this point, she noticed Sophie and Abdullah.
Where did you two spring from?
She said. Flower in the Night whirled around. For a moment, when she saw Abdullah, there was everything in her face he could have wished for. Recognition, delight, love, and pride.
I knew you'd come to rescue me,
said her big dark eyes. Then, to his hurt and perplexity, it all went. Her face became smooth and polite. She bowed courteously.
This is Prince Abdullah from Zanzib,
she said.
But I am not acquainted with the lady.
Flower in the Night's behavior shook Abdullah from his daze. It must be jealousy of Sophie, he thought. He, too, bowed and made haste to explain.
This lady, oh pearls in many a king's diadems, is wife to the royal wizard Howl, and comes here in search of her child.
Princess Beatrice turned her keen, weathered face to Sophie.
Oh, it's your baby,
she said.
Howl with you by any chance?
No, Sophie said miserably.
I hoped he'd be here. Not a trace of him, I'm afraid,
said Princess Beatrice.
Pity. He'd be useful even if he did help conquer my country. But we've got your baby. Come this way.
Princess Beatrice led the way to the back of the room, past the group of princesses trying to comfort Valeria. Since Flower in the Night went with her, Abdullah followed. To his increasing distress, Flower in the Night was now barely looking at him, only inclining her head politely at each princess they passed.
The Princess of Alberia,
she said formally.
The Princess of Faktan, the Lady Heiress of Theak. This is the Princess of Pekstan, and beside her the Paragon of Inhiko. Beyond her, you see the Damoiselle of Dorimind.
So if it was not jealousy, what was it? Abdullah wondered unhappily. There was a wide bench at the back of the room with cushions on it.
My oddment shelf,
Sophie growled. There were 3 princesses sitting on the bench. The elderly princess Abdullah had noticed before, a lumpish princess swaddled in a coat, and the tiny yellow princess perched in the middle between them. The tiny princess's twig-like arms were wrapped around the chubby pink body of Morgan.
She is, as far as we can pronounce it, High Princess of Stefan,
Flower in the Night said formally.
On her right is the Princess of High Norland. On her left, the Jarine of Jam.
The tiny High Princess of Stefan looked like a child with a doll too big for her, but in the most expert and experienced way. She was giving Morgan a feed from a large baby bottle.
He's fine with her, said Princess Beatrice. Good thing for her. Stopped her moping. She says she had 14 babies of her own.
The tiny princess glanced up with a shy smile.
Boy, Thal,
she said, in a small, lisping voice. Morgan's toes and hands were curling and uncurling. He looked the picture of a satisfied baby. Sophie gazed for a moment.
Where did she get that bottle?
She asked, as if she were afraid it might be poisoned. The tiny princess looked up again. She smiled and spared a minute finger to point.
Doesn't speak our language very well,
Princess Beatrice explained.
But that genie seemed to understand her.
The princess's twig-like finger was pointing to the floor by the bench, where, below her small, dangling feet, stood a familiar blue-mauve bottle. Abdullah dived for it. The lumpish Yarin of Yam dived for it at the same moment, with an unexpectedly big, strong hand. "Stop it!" the genie howled from inside as they tussled for it. "I'm not coming out! Those djinns will kill me this time for sure!" Abdullah took hold of the bottle in both hands and jerked. The jerk caused the swaddling coat to fall away from the Yarin. Abdullah found himself looking into wide blue eyes and a lined face inside a bush of grizzled hair. The face wrinkled innocently as the old soldier gave him a sheepish smile and let go of the genie bottle.
"You!"
Abdullah said disgustedly.
"Loyal subject of mine,"
Princess Beatrice explained.
"Turned up to rescue me. Rather awkward, actually. We had to disguise him."
Sophie swept Abdullah and Princess Beatrice aside.
"Let me get at him!"
she said.